How you doing? I'm Mark Brennan, and you're on jamplay.com. Thanks for joining me again for my basic electric lesson series. Today we're going to talk about amplification. Okay, talk more about your gear. Last lesson we talked about the guitar, so hopefully you're pretty familiar with the controls in your guitar. Now we'll talk about your amp. Now, of course, if you're going to play electric guitar, you need to get an amp. You can start off with a basic practice amp, and to get started, those are really good. They're perfectly adequate. You're not going to be doing a lot of jamming with bands right off the top of the bat, so you don't need a lot of volume. So the practice amp works real good. And then as you go through in your guitar journey, as you get better and you start jamming with people, you're going to find that you're going to need better quality amps, better sounding amps, amps that can cut through with the volume you need when you're playing with a full rhythm section. You're going to find that the little practice amp doesn't work if you try to play with a band. So if you're good enough that you are going to play with a band, then you're going to have to step up to a better amp. Now, you might have bought the amp as part of a package deal, and the amp that you probably have is a small, like, crate practice amp. Now that amp is probably a what we would call a solid state amp. In other words, it doesn't have tubes in it. So generally the solid state amps are cheaper in cost, and they don't have the big full round tone that a tube amp would have. But for clean playing, they work perfectly well. And you get distortion sounds with the solid state amp. They just don't have the full distortion sound of a tube amp. Now, if you can step up to a tube amp as like maybe your second amp, or if you can even afford a small tube amp like the Fender Blues Junior, which I have, then you're going to get just really superb tone right off the bat. Not to say that solid state amps sound like garbage. They really don't. They sound good, and you can learn how to work with distortion with those. But as soon as you get good enough where you're thinking of jamming with friends, or you're even going to get into a band, or you're going to be doing home recording where tone is more of an issue, then you probably want to consider investing in a nice tube amp, which is what I have right here. This is my Mesa Boogie Mark IV. I wouldn't suggest you go out and buy one of these right off the bat, because this is a real pro amp. Since I do a lot of playing and recording, I'm in a band, and I play professionally. So I made the investment in a real nice amp that's very versatile. But this amp has all the features of a basic practice amp. So what we'll do is we will go through the controls of this amp. I might make mentions of some of the added features that my amp has, but what I'm going to do is focus mostly on the controls that your amp is going to have, so you can understand how to use the amp, how to get a tone that you're looking for out of the amp, how to use distortion, and just how to basically shape the tone that you want to get and have a lot of fun with it. Okay, so we'll take a break here and we'll get back and we'll start going over the controls of the amp. See you soon. Okay, we're back. We're going to take a look at my amplifier here. We're going to talk about the controls, and I'm going to discuss it in a manner that relates to your amp, hopefully. My amp has many controls and many features on it. It's a very versatile amp. It actually has 3 channels. Now I'll explain what that means later, but I'm going to focus on the controls that are going to be on your amplifier. Okay, so I'm going to start down here on the left end of my amp here. Now, tube amps will have 2 switches. Normally there'll be 2 switches to turn the amp on with. You have the power switch. Now what that does is you turn the amp on with the power switch, but you're not going to hear any sound at that point. With a tube amp, you go through like a minute or a minute and a half period where the tubes warm up before you actually do any playing. With a solid state amp like your practice amp, you turn that, you're going to have one on switch and you're going to be on right away. There's no warming up like with a tube amp. And then most tube amps like mine will have a standby switch. Now the standby switch takes away some of the juice out of the tubes, and it actually saves on the tube life. And you would use the standby switch if you were like on a break at a gig, or you were turning your amp on before a gig and prior to going out on the show, you would leave that on, and that would save the life of your tubes a little bit. And then when you go to play, you just flip the standby switch on and you're instantly on, you're ready to go. So the way to power up a tube amp is you power up, the standby switch will be in standby, you'll power it up, and then when you'll go through the warm-up period of about a minute or minute and a half, and then you turn it on, turn the standby switch on, and you are ready to rock and roll. Okay, so the amp is on now. Now this first control here is my overall output level control. Okay, now most practice amps have an overall output level control. Now what this does is it allows you to control the volume of your amp in relationship to how much distortion and gain you're using. Now you're going to have a separate gain control. Okay, that might be labeled volume, it might be labeled gain, but you're going to notice that that control actually gives you more volume, but it adds more distortion to your sound. The overall output level control controls the last stage of the volume of your amp. So if you're playing with a lot of distortion and you don't want to blow out any windows in your house, you can back down your overall output level to a comfortable level. And it also allows you to turn your amp up a little bit if you need more volume, if you're playing with other people or you're playing with a rhythm section. Amps of old didn't have this. It used to be that if you wanted to turn up the volume on your amp to get the sound, it always came along with a lot of volume too, and there wasn't any way to control your volume. Now amps have the output level control to help you control your overall volume. So that's a great feature. And even practice amps have that because you're going to be able to get the distortion, and that way you can control your volume. Okay, let me make quick mention of my my pedal up here. Now this came with the amp. Entry-level practice amps normally don't have the switching that the more expensive amps have. But since it's sitting here, I'm going to be using it. I thought I'd make mention of it. I have a 3-channel amp. Okay, so I can switch to the different channels to get different amounts of distortion and different sounds, different volume levels. So I can put this on the floor and I can change my tones right on the fly with this thing. Now, some amps have this as an option. You can get it. If you can get the channel switching pedal with the amp, I would definitely get this because it makes it a lot easier to change your tones on the fly. You don't have to come to the amp and press a button on it. A lot of practice amps, if you want to use the distortion, you have to go to the amp and there's going to be a button that switches the channel for you. Now, if you're just practicing and you're not in a band, that might work out good for you. But if you're going to be playing a full song where you're going to be going from a clean sound to a distortion sound, the channel switching is real important. This also has a couple other features my amp has. It has, I've got the graphic equalizer on here, and this activates the graphic equalizer. And then I have an effects loop on my amp, which I won't get into right now, but I can click on the effects loop and click off the effects loop with that button. But these are the three main channels that are important to the amp because these switch the channels on the amp. You might have a 2-channel amp that you can press a button and it switches the channels right on the fly. I've seen some amps have pedals that you can activate the reverb on the amp too, and shut off the reverb if you so desire. It all depends on the amp and the model, but it's a real nice feature to have. Okay, now we'll get down to the controls. Now there's a lot of controls on my Mark IV here, but there are basic controls on your amp that every amp has, and we'll go through these. Every channel is going to have a gain control. Now you might have 2 gain controls on your amp. The one gain control is going to be for your clean sound. And again, the more you turn the gain up, the more distortion you're going to get. You're going to hear you get that crunchy distortion sound with your guitar the more you turn that up. And again, if the volume starts to get too much, then you just turn back your overall output level control. Now, again, my amp has 3 channels, okay, and I'll demonstrate it with my guitar in the next segment. But there are different levels of distortion and different levels of volume that I can set up on the amp. Each channel has its own rhythm, or its own gain control. And again, it controls, it has a lot to do with volume, but mostly it has to do with the amount of distortion and crunch you get. My lead gain is my real saturated sound. That if I turn it way up, I'm getting like the full saturated distortion that I would use for you know, a lot of solos and a lot of metal work. It's really good to have that. Now you're going to have a set of equalization controls. Okay, these are more commonly known as your tone controls. And most amps now have 3 of them. You're going to have a bass control, a mid-range or a middle control, and a treble control. Now those have to do with the different spectrums of the frequency range. Here's my treble control. This will control the amount of the high end, or the shimmer. When I turn my treble up, I'm getting a much brighter sound that cuts through more. You got to be careful with that. Sometimes it gets too shrill, too tinny. So you set that for taste. You set that for the amount of brightness that you want. The bass control, as the name would suggest, it cuts or boosts the bottom end of your guitar, the bass of the guitar. If you want a fuller bassier sound, you're going to turn the bass up. And then the mid-range control is real important because it has to do with that spectrum in the middle, where it controls the amount of well, honkiness for one thing. You might want to control that by cutting it down a little bit, and it gives you a little more bit of clarity when you cut out the mids. A lot of distortion sounds sound good with more mid because you want to boost those mid frequencies. So you're wondering, well, how do I use these controls? Well, you have to experiment with them with your guitar, and the amount of distortion that you have, these controls work differently. You just set it for taste. You set it for the sound you get. When you experiment with the 3 different things, you're gonna hear the effect they have on your sound. Okay, so that's basically about it for the basic practice amp. You might have a spring reverb on your amp. Now that gives you that room sound. It gives you a spatial sound. Makes you sound like you're playing in a bigger room. Kind of brings the guitar to life a little bit with reverb. You probably have a reverb control that turns up the amount of reverb that you have. So you set that for taste. If you're playing in a real small bedroom, the reverb can do a world of good for you as far as giving it a bigger, fuller sound. Now on my amp, I have EQ controls for each channel. Okay, so it really gives me a lot of versatility over my sound with each channel. And then I also have a lead drive, which gives me more kick for my lead channel. And then I have these overall master controls for each channel. Now entry-level amps don't have this, but I can control the overall volume before my last output level control. I can control the overall volume of each channel to get a balance. Okay, so I can say I'll be playing a rhythm sound, I'll be at one volume, say I want to kick up my volume a little bit more when I go into a crunch rhythm or a lead sound. I can turn these up and have those get a little bit louder. That way when I'm playing at a gig, I don't have to turn around and turn my volume control up on my amp so anybody can hear my lead. It just automatically gives it a kick in volume. Okay, so that's about it. Again, it's a matter of experimentation with your amp. Basically, you're working with the amount of distortion you're getting out of your amp and the tone controls to control the overall tone of your guitar. Okay, so that about does it for this segment. What I'll do is I'm going to get my guitar and I'll demonstrate these controls, the gain controls and the EQ controls with my guitar. Okay, so let me get my guitar and I'll be right back. Thanks. Okay, we're back with Amplification. Glad you could join me, Mark Brennan, and you're on jamplay.com. I've got my Mesa Boogie Mark IV. This is I love this amp. It's a real tone machine. But again, you can get good tone out of the smallest little practice amp if you just know how to tweak the controls on it, and you work the controls on your guitar too. So I'm going to demonstrate that a little bit with the guitar. Let's go back over here. I talked about the standby switch. Now, say I do a set and I want to go on break. I just put that, the amp's off. I'm saving the life of my tube, and that's a good thing because tubes can be expensive, and you want your tubes to last, at least a couple years before you have to redo your tubes. And when I come back on, I'm instantly back on. Now again, if I shut the amp down by turning off the main power, the tubes shut completely off and they cool down. So when you turn the amp back on that way, there's going to be, again, a minute or a minute and a half of warm-up that you have to go through. So as long as there's not a long period of time that your amp's going to be sitting, just go ahead and use the standby switch. And if you have a solid-state amp, you don't even have to worry about that. You just shut it off and it's instantly off, and back on, it's instantly on. Okay, so I talked about my overall volume control. This is just it's just basically a volume control. It has nothing to do with the distortion. So when I'm playing on a big stage with a loud band, I can crank this up and get it as loud as I need. And if somebody walks over to me and says, "Mark, you're too damn loud," which is a notorious thing for guitar players, then it's easy just to turn the overall volume of my guitar down without changing the tones or the EQ settings. Okay, so here's my channel switching. I'm on Rhythm 1 now. Okay, now Rhythm 1 is my clean channel. You probably have a marking on your amp that says it's either the clean volume or Rhythm 1, and you're going to notice that you don't get a lot of distortion with this channel. Okay, so here's my Rhythm 1 gain. Now, if I roll this back to like 4 or 5, it's like crystal clean. Even with my dynamics of my guitar, with the loudness and softness, it's still gonna be nice and clean. Now that's great for rhythm work. If you're just doing a real basic strum. Where distortion is something you definitely don't want. Now I can take my Rhythm 1 gain control and kick it up to 7 or 8, and then it's going to start to break up a little bit for me. So it's still kind of clean, but it has a little bit of edge now. Okay, so if I pick a little harder, it's going to break up a little bit more. And then I can go all the way up to 10, and you can see that it's still clean. I'm still getting real clean clarity out of every chord tone, but it's definitely much fuller sounding, and it has a little bit of edge to it. Okay, so it's a real versatile channel, but I usually set it about, well, in my Pink Floyd band, I keep it at about 7 or 8 because it just the sound I get at that particular level uh, is good for me in that. Now, with the rhythm channel 1, we'll give you an idea of the tone controls. Okay, so I have my treble at about 7 or 8 right now. If I want to cut off some of the brightness or the shimmer, see if I just roll that back a couple notches, and it takes some of the brightness away. Still getting a nice twang from my guitar, but it's not quite as harsh. Now, if I needed to cut through a little bit more, if I want a little bit of brightness, I'll kick it up a couple notches, and that's all the way up. You know, if the sound I'm looking for or the song calls for a lot of treble, that's a good place to get it. Okay, the bass. That's the bass all the way off. You hear you're not getting any low end from your guitar, so you definitely want to keep the bass up to about maybe 5 or 6. If you want it fuller, like with a Stratocaster style guitar or Fenders, you might want to kick your bass up to give it a little fuller sound. And then the mid range has to do with those mid frequencies. You can see when you roll off the mid, it's taken off the mid frequencies. It's still bright and bassy, but it doesn't have that what I call a little honkiness in the middle. But it takes away some of the fullness too, so I like to bring the mid up to about 6 or 7. That's a little too much, so roll it back a little bit. Okay, now in your practice amp, your tone controls are going to control any sound you're getting out of it, no matter what channel you're using. It's probably, you're going to have a distortion side to your amp, and the tone controls will affect your distortion sound too. Okay, so let's go over to your distortion side. Now let's say you have a push button switch where you push in. You're going to notice that you're going to get the distortion, and you probably have to tweak your gain control for your distortion. Okay, so I'm going to go over to my Rhythm 2 channel with my foot switch. And you can see automatically I've got the distortion going. I got it at about 8. Now I can roll off the distortion on this to almost to the point where it's clean. Okay, so at about 7, I'm getting a nice crunch now going. And if I want more, I can actually set up a nice lead sound with this if I get it up to 8 or 9. Notice I'm getting more sustained with this now because of the distortion. Or I can back it down a little bit for a little less. A lot of songs you hear, the rhythm part is just breaking up a little bit. He's trying to get more clarity out of his tone, so he's not using as much distortion. So that's a great thing to be able to do with your amp, to control the amount of distortion. So if you turn your gain distortion all the way up, that's the maximum amount of distortion you're going to get out of your amp. So with my gain 2, I have a Blues Junior, a Fender Blues Junior that just it's a it's a single channel amp, but it has distortion controls that I can kick in, and it really doesn't give me a ton of distortion, just enough for like a blues gig. And if I would need to get an additional gain control for solos, I would have to get like a distortion pedal, an extra distortion stomp box for that. But the beauty of my Mark IV here is I have a third channel on it that's a lead channel that gives me all the gain that I need. I'm going to click over to that, and so you can hear the difference with that. Now again, it's the same deal. I can roll off a little bit of the distortion by, but even at the low settings, it's still breaking up. But that isn't what I use this channel for. I use it for solos. And if I'm doing any metal work, I'm not really a metal player like Hodges, so I really don't use a lot of metal tones. I'm more of a classic rocker. But when I use it for solos, I get it up to about 8, and it gives me a lot of sustain. And then the chording really gets way over the top. And then instantly on the fly, go back to nice trebly clean. So the channel switching pedal really is a plus with the amp, especially if you're playing gigs, jamming with friends. You're doing whole songs where you're the rhythm guitarist and the lead guitarist at the same time. You need to go from a nice rhythm sound, whether it be a crunch rhythm, then into a solo. Okay, now the last lesson we talked about the controls of the guitar, and a lot of your tone and gain has to do with the settings on your guitar also. So I'm going to swing over to the guitar a little bit here. I'm going to set up my EQ to taste with a particular channel, and then I'm going to experiment with the different pickup selector positions. And the beauty of a Stratocaster is you have 5 different tone options. Okay, we talked about this position being the fretboard pickup, and then the middle position is the middle pickup. Kind of brings out a little bit more of the mid-range, and then the bridge pickup is going to give you your brightest sound. So these different pickup combinations and selections really control the overall sound of the guitar that you're getting. And a lot of that's going to be to taste for the particular song you're playing, the arrangement of the song and the band. You're just going to have to use your ear and experiment for the best setting. But each one has a beautiful tone on its own. So you experiment with the EQ on your amp and the the different pickup selections that you make in your guitar to get the particular sound you're looking for the particular song you're playing, or the particular song that you're writing, the kind of thing that you're going for. Okay. I do have an overall tone control on this guitar too. Okay, so it rolls off some of the high end. Okay, now the volume control is real important as far as controlling your distortion. You can set up a distortion sound on your amp. Let's go to channel 2 with the crunch. Now, I can back off the amount of distortion a little bit with my volume control. So if I back it down, it takes off some of the distortion. A little bit of the volume too. So I can also control my on-the-fly volume and distortion with the volume control on my guitar. Say I'll be playing in the middle of the song. Then I'm going to go into a heavier power chord thing. Another thing that adds to my distortion or lack of distortion is the pick attack. Okay, if I can pick an arpeggio pattern nice and light, and then as the song gets more intense, I can pick a little harder to get a little more breakup. And if I need more, just turn the volume up. Back to clean. Okay, so if you have just a 2-channel amp, you can control the amounts of distortion you have on a particular channel with your guitar also. So a lot going on here, but it's just a matter of experimentation and getting comfortable with your equipment. And as you go along in your career and you have more expendable income for your guitar rig, you want to make sure you got a really nice guitar. There's no doubt about that. I suggest to students that, you know, if you're going to step up with the guitar first and then get the amp. Okay. But as you see, the two go hand in hand. Different guitars and different amps get different sounds. There's just a myriad of options to you as far as the style of music that you want to play. You know, I'm a classic rocker. I'm real comfortable on a Strat style guitar. My Mesa Boogie is a beautiful tone machine. It's real versatile, and it works great for me and a lot of different types of gigs. I can set it up a lot of different ways. Okay, so experimentation is the key here. You know, even if you got a little crate, 10 watt or 5 watt crate amp, try to get a good sound on it. You know, a lot of it has to do with the way that you play the guitar too. A lot of people say, well, I've got the exact same rig as this guy that I emulate, but I can't get the sound like him. Well, it's because of the way that the guy plays, the way that he works the strings with his fingers, his pick attack. It all goes hand in hand with the sound that you get. Okay. All right, so have fun with your amp. You know how to reach me if you have any more questions. I hope it wasn't too confusing with this amp, but again, you got the bare bones controls. You got your distortion controls, your overall volume, your EQ, and you should be able to get a great sound with that. So have fun, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.